Hello! My setup is egregious. We're just gonna ignore it together, really, is what we're gonna do. I figured since it was Halloween, I would do two things. First, I would do a fun little makeup look. And the second thing was I figured I'd talk about a fun horror story known as Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It's one of my favorite classic novels. Why not combine the two? I'll do a fun little Frankenstein makeup look, and also I can hopefully present a video essay that is good enough that you can plagiarize it for your English essays. The thing about like summarizing book stories is I don't know how to do it really well. So do me a favor, go watch somebody else summarize it. Just don't rely on me for a complete summary of what's going on in that book. You're not gonna get it from me, frankly. I will try my best to summarize it, but what I would recommend is just watch like overly sarcastic productions, read the spark notes on it. I don't know, dude. You know the story of Frankenstein. Why are you relying on me for everything? I can't write your essay and summarize the book for you. Frankenstein is like a weird book because it doesn't actually like start out. Okay, so you start out with this dude on a boat and he's in the Arctic or like somewhere cold and icy, and he's like, yes, adventure. And then they see this like old, well not old, but like real Skeletor looking dude, white hair, emancipated, whole 9 yards. So they save him because they're good people. And they pick him up and he's like, I have committed horrors against humanity. And then he faints, so they have to nurse him back to health. And as they nurse him back to health, the main dude is like, I want to know your story, and I'm gonna write it all down and I'm gonna send it to my sister. None of this is important at all. This is just how the book starts. I have no idea why Mary Shelley decided to do this, but she did. So he's like, can you tell me your whole life story? And so Victor Frankenstein says, of course I can. So we begin at Victor Frankenstein's birth. Not even his birth. He talks about his parents for a little bit. Again, none of it's really important. I am separating my face in two sections. What we do need to know is that his parents are like fairly wealthy. They adopt a little girl because she's pretty. Speaking on the little girl, her name is Elizabeth, and she is Victor's like sister girlfriend. It's really gross, but essentially they're like, yeah, well, you're gonna marry her. Also, she's your adopted sister. And they just think this is fine. And so Victor grows up with his sister girlfriend and his old pal Henry, like Cheval or something. I don't know how to pronounce names. The characters are on SparkNotes. You do that yourself. And those are our characters so far. We got Victor, and he's most important. Victor at a young age is like really into science, but he makes sure to preface that the science books he's reading are like alchemy books and stuff. And if you don't know anything about alchemy, it's not that they were wrong. It's that they kind of just went for it without like doing science. They're scientists, but without the science. They had a lot of ideas. It just never went anywhere. So Victor gets into science and he's like, I want to be a doctor or something. And so he heads off to college. Elizabeth is interested in like poetry, and his buddy Henry is like a merchant. He's interested in like learning new languages and traveling. So Victor's the science guy, and he gets sent to college where he soon finds out that, hey, alchemy isn't really studied anymore. So Victor is introduced to like real science for the first time in his life, and he loves it. He actually loves the scientific method. He likes doing experiments. He likes all of it. He also likes doing like anatomy and stuff. He gets really interested in that. So his professors are like, dude, you can't read those alchemy books. It's fake science. Read these books instead. So Victor reads all those books. Victor is at school and he does very well. But Victor misses the fun part of alchemy and like old sciences, which is that they thought a lot. What I mean by that is that they promised a lot of things they couldn't deliver on, but these were things, the questions they were asking were much bigger. They were like, how do we turn lead into gold? How do we create immortality? How do we do this? Whereas the science that Victor was learning was more like, how do we explain the world? But Victor, he misses all this, the grandiose that old science had. And this is what I mean by alchemy, because like, fun fact, we have actually turned lead into gold recently because it is in fact possible. It's just alchemists weren't going to do it because they didn't have the scientific method. And that leads us in this weird situation where now Victor is like missing the fun part of alchemy and wanting to incorporate new scientific methods into it, right? So Victor takes some time and he decides he wants to figure out the secret to creating life. So he does. It takes him like a page to do this, by the way, and he doesn't tell us how to create life because like he doesn't want anybody else to do it. Obviously, it's supposed to be like a warning story, so he's like loose on the details. I'm just splitting my face into like fun sections and then lightly tinting them with fun colors. Oh, I'm stupid. I should have made my mouth the same color so I didn't have to paint my neck. I'll wear a turtleneck. So now that he's figured out how to create life, he does. He locks himself up in his room and gets to work. Goes to some graveyards, digs up some cadavers, cuts those fools up, and then boom, creates new life. So, like I said, Victor was interested in anatomy, and that's why he chose to make a human person, and that's why he could do it. Hold on, I got a phone call. Hello? Okay, where was I? This is a lot on camera. I promise you, not that much in real life. He specifically states that he made his monster, his creation, like 9 feet tall. Now, he says he does this because anatomy is really complicated, so by enlarging it, it makes it much easier for him to reanimate and, like, sew everything back together. So, he has an excuse, but it's a bad one. So, he reanimates the dead, right? He flips a switch, whatever. The creation opens his eyes, and this is when Victor thinks that maybe there might be consequences to actions. This is the first time he thinks this thought, and it will be the last time. The thing about the creature, Frankenstein's monster, whatever you want to call him, we'll get into that later, is that the idea that you have in your head is probably incorrect. So if you're thinking like something like what I look like now, screws out of his neck, green, whole 9 yards, he doesn't actually look like that. Because Victor Frankenstein is a scientist first and foremost, but most importantly, he's a narcissist. He's got a giant ego. He's not gonna make something ugly, okay? So the monster is described as being beautiful because of course he is. Victor created him. Of course he's beautiful. What are you implying by saying anything otherwise? He's just big. And also when his eyes open, he ends up having these like yellow eyes that like kind of glow sort of. Not really, they're just described as really yellow and thus glowing. You can take it to mean that they actually glow, but I don't think they were supposed to be like fluorescence, you know? Anyway, so the monster opens his eyes, and Victor is like, oh, and promptly faints. When he has a weird dream about his mom and girlfriend sister, and then he wakes up, and the monster that he created is nowhere to be found, and he is immensely relieved by this. Then Victor's good pal, Henry, shows up, and is like, hey dude, you haven't contacted your family in like months, like since you came to college. You good? And the answer is no. Victor is struggling a lot because he just created life. So Victor promptly faints again, this time due to malnourishment of his body. And so his good pal, good friend, Mary Shelley, nurses him back to health. And while he's doing that, has to throw away all of Victor's science stuff because now that stuff is like a trigger for him. It makes him panic every time he sees it. So he's like, okay, we'll just get rid of it, I guess. I haven't read the book in a minute. I'm gonna be for real with you, but a lot of it's not important to like major themes, like how the story actually plays out. All that you really need to know is around this point, after Victor has been nursed to health, it's been like a minute. He was really, really not doing well. They get another letter from Victor's father basically saying that, hey, your little brother is dead. You need to come home immediately. At first, Victor doesn't really think anything of this. He's like, oh no, that sucks. Some dude murdered my brother. That's awful. They're on their drive back home, and Victor sees the monster just chilling nearby. And he's like, the creature killed my brother. But he can't tell anybody this because, first of all, then it would be his fault that his brother was murdered, right? But also because who's going to believe him? And he's freaking out too because he just had this very traumatic experience and he can't tell anybody about it. And this is when things go from bad to worse because the person accused of murdering his little brother is a friend of his girlfriend's sister. Her name's like Justine or Jessica or something like that, someone with J. And she's accused of murdering the little boy because she had like a necklace or something on her person when they found her. This is bad news, so she is promptly put on trial for the murder. And Victor is like, she didn't do it. I know she didn't do it. I know it had to have been the thing I created in my lab. But he can't tell anybody this, again, because they want to believe him. However, the problem with this is that because he doesn't tell anybody, this innocent woman is murdered for murdering his brother, even though he knows that she didn't do it. And he is pretty much directly the cause of this. So while Victor never ends up like directly murdering anybody, he does indirectly murder this woman. So keep that in mind when you're writing your essays. So now he's like, I can't believe this dude murdered my brother. I'm so mad at him. And he eventually manages to catch sight of him while he's like fishing or something. And he's like, now's my chance. and he chases after the monster and is like, I'm gonna murder you. Except the monster is 9 feet tall and is like, you're gonna try to murder me and you're not gonna achieve anything because you're so small and I'm bigger than you. Basically, you know when like a little kids play with you and you just hold their head, swinging their arms, but they can't reach you because you're just bigger. Basically, the monster does that to him. And this is when the monster decides to tell his entire life story inside of Victor's life story that some dude is sending to his sister. Again, keep that in mind, mainly because it's funny, not because it has any relevance to the plot. So, pausing Victor's life story, let's talk about the creature, the monster, whatever. Basically, he was born and some dude fainted when he first saw him. Turns out this is his creator, his father. And so now he's like a baby, essentially, a walking 2-year-old. He was just born, and he ends up walking into the woods, and that's where he stays for a good portion, because whenever he goes up to people, they like throw things at him and throw sticks, and he's like, people bad. So he stays away from them, which means that he's never really socialized for like a good portion of his life, but he's very smart and clever. So again, unlike the popular idea that we're given of Frankenstein's monster, he's not afraid of fire. He actually uses it to his advantage and like cooks stuff because cooked foods taste better. He's like living in these woods and he finds this cabin and he moves into the cellar. And this is underneath a family house where like a grandpa and his 2 kids live. Again, that might not be exact, but it doesn't really matter towards the actual story. But you get this whole family's life story because it's important for our theme. It's not important. I don't remember what they're about. Just know that it's like the grandpa's blind. And so Victor helps out around the farm, and because he's living underneath the cellar and because he gets some access to books, he eventually learns language and pays attention to what these guys are talking about and saying. So now he's helping more and more accurately at that. Which leads to this problem where the family is like, somebody is like giving us firewood and stuff, and we don't know who. But don't look a gift horse in the mouth. So they end up like kind of ignoring it because they're like, what are we gonna do? Like yell at some dude for giving us firewood? Like it's fine. Anyways, one day the 2 kids walk out. It's like a boy and a girl. They leave Grandpa alone by the fire, and he's blind, remember? So this is the creature's chance. He's like, I got this. I can talk to this dude because he doesn't know what I look like. So he walks in, he's like, hello, I am just a traveler. Don't mind how tall I sound. And the grandpa dude is like, traveler, come on in, enjoy yourself. And the conversation goes well for like a little bit, but again, the monster has never been like socialized. So he goes creepy really quick. He's their stalker, essentially. And so he starts to know a little bit too much information that he shouldn't. And the grandpa starts to get a little freaked out. He's like, how did you know about that? I don't know who you are. Why do you know so much about my family? And that's when the kids come back and they're like, oh my god, that's a weird guy who's like 8 feet tall and is talking to our defenseless grandpa. And so they throw rocks at him and kick him out. This is when the monster is like, this is stupid. And why don't I have a family? I should have a family. That's how things work. I've read books now. And so he goes back to where he was created, figures out that, you know, the last name's Frankenstein. And so he tracks down, like, the family, meets little brother in the woods. Little brother's like, I'm Frankenstein, and you're weird. So he kills him because he's mad at what is essentially his father for abandoning him at birth and never teaching him how to be like a normal person. He's a weirdo now because of his dad. This is when he runs into Justine, Jessica, whatever her face is, and he sees her sleeping in a barn because, again, they're looking for the little boy who went missing. And he sees her and he's like, you are a woman and you won't love me because I'm ugly. So he kills her. That's right, kids. He's an incel. And basically he just waits for Victor to get there. Once Victor gets there, he's like, okay, let's talk in the woods. And that brings us basically up to speed to where we are now in the story, which is Victor talking to the monster in the woods. This is also where the creature is like, yeah, you might as well call me Adam because I'm like the first of my kind, just like Adam was the first man. You know, depending on your like teacher, usually they just call him like the creature, the monster, or whatever. And you could call him Frankenstein too if you wanted to. That's technically his name because that's his dad's name. So Frankenstein isn't wrong either. Those people who are like, it's Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein's his father. He can go by Frankenstein if he wants. Anyways, so that's where Adam comes from. A lot of people call him Adam. Usually I call him Adam too because it's less confusing than having to go through creature, monster, whatever. This is when Adam is like, okay, listen, you abandoned me and that's your fault. You were a bad dad. You brought me into this world. You weren't ready for it. You abandoned me. That's why I'm crazy and a weirdo. You ever seen me without this stupid hat on? You have to make it right. Give me a girlfriend. He wants Victor to mate somebody just like him who is like weird looking and 8 feet tall so that they have no choice but to be together, essentially. And Victor's like, no! And the monster's like, I will kill you. So actually, yes. Victor's like, I'll think about it. This is also where we get one of my favorite lines of the book, by the way. And he's like, Adam's like, you may be my creator, but I am your master. Obey! It's a cool line. So essentially, we're at this impasse now where Victor is like, fine, I'll give the dude a girlfriend. That way he'll leave me alone. So Victor travels like away from his family, and his father, by the way, is like, hey, you're gonna get married to your sister girlfriend soon because there's been a lot of tragedy, and I think it would do you good because you're all sad all the time. And nothing fixes sadness like a woman, so be prepared to get married soon. And he's like, cool, I gotta go do something soon though in a very isolated place near a graveyard. So he travels with his good buddy pal, Henry. They go to this place, and Victor sets up shop while Henry goes about his business. The thing about Victor is that he isolates himself a lot. So, like, when he was going to college, he was already ignoring his family. And as he's doing his sins against nature, he tends to withdraw. He, like, starts ignoring Henry, essentially. And Henry's like, hey, dude, we're, like, in this new place. Let's go be tourists. And he's like, I can't. I have to do something. So he starts digging up cadavers, except this time it's lady cadavers, until halfway through when she's almost ready to be born, Victor comes to a realization. Hey, just because I make this girl for him, it doesn't mean this girl will like him. She'll have her own thoughts and opinions. She'll essentially be a person when I create her. There's no guarantee that she'll even like him. And if she does like him, they could have children, which would result in more of these abominations walking the earth. He says the word abomination, not me. And he's like, I can't do this, and destroys what he's made. This is when the creature decides to murder his good buddy, friend, pal, Henry. Say goodbye to Henry. I know everybody liked Henry. He's dead now. He gets put in jail for this because they're like, hey, creepy dude who never left his house. Your friend's dead. You want to explain that? I think what ends up happening actually is that the body of Henry washes up somewhere with Victor. They like wash up on some other shore somewhere. Again, it's not really important. All that matters is that Henry's dead. Victor's blamed for it, passes out in prison a couple of times until Daddy and his money comes and saves him and is like, he didn't kill him. He wouldn't do that. I'm taking him home. If you just forget this happened, well, I'll take him from here and then you won't have to worry about it. And they're like, all right. So they let Victor leave, and he keeps seeing the monster, Adam, right outside of his vision, taunting him, being like, hey dude, you didn't do what I asked. Now you're going to pay for that. So Victor's like, alright, I'm gonna get married to my wife, and then I'm gonna die. And he like says goodbye to, Elizabeth. He's like, let's get married quickly as soon as possible. Also, I love you. Because he's planning on not living very long past the wedding. So they get married. He keeps seeing the monster, like, out of the corner of his eye during the whole thing. He convinces Elizabeth to, like, go as far out away from, like, anything as possible, because he's essentially trying to outrun this guy. And he's stupid, so he doesn't think about the fact that maybe the monster won't kill him. By the way, when Adam is threatening Victor, he says something like, I will take away from you if you don't give me what I want. And we, the audience, is like, oh, he's gonna kill his wife. Give him a girlfriend, or else he's gonna take away your girlfriend. Victor never thinks of this, so he's like, he must want me. It's like, no, dude, don't you have a girlfriend? He ends up killing Elizabeth because duh. So Elizabeth is dead, his brother is dead. Victor is like, I've had enough, I'm gonna kill you. So he chases the monster down, and Adam is trying to evade him. So he travels pretty much all over the world until he reaches like Arctica, which is where they are now. And that's where the story is basically caught up. We're caught up with Victor and his life. That's how he ended up here, is because he's chasing the demon spawn he created. And the guy listening to this is like, oh, that explains the weird crazy guy that my sailors were talking about seeing a while ago. Victor's like, where? And then promptly passes out because, again, he's malnourished and has been self-isolating for like a very long time and not taking care of himself. This is when the dude writing the story to his sister meets the monster who shows up and sees Victor, who is like on the verge of death because he traversed the Arctic with very little supplies after not taking care of himself. So he's like about to die. And he's like, all I wanted was to be a person. He never treated me like a person. decided to murder everybody. And Victor dies. Again, he hasn't been taking care of himself. The monster watches him die and then is like, alright, bye, and then throws himself out the window. And then the dude who was going to the Arctic is like, maybe adventure and ambition is only good in moderation, and promptly decides to go home. This is too much. He had his story and he's like, okay, what if I went home now, actually? And that's the end of the story. That is the quick version. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with some themes, some symbolism, and a book that has lasted the ages, that was written by like a 16-year-old girl in like one night. Pretty cool. Let's talk about the characters quickly, because they're very good characters. Mary Shelley managed to write very interesting characters, because while you're reading it, you're like, Victor, you're such an idiot. But you don't ever really hate the guy. Like, you get it. He's only like 20 years old. Again, this is something that a lot of people, it's like misconstrued, I guess. They change it in like film adaptations. They make him like an actual doctor, when instead he's just a college student in the book. He's like barely 20 when he first goes to college. And so like you get it, because he's just like a stupid kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. Like, yeah, of course he's not prepared to be a father, but also, why'd you create life? And he is really smart too. So you get the ambition where he's like, no, I'm gonna do it because I can. And so you follow along with that and you're like, of course you're gonna do it because you can, because you're smart. Of course you want to. And so it leaves the viewer and or the reader in a very odd place, because you never hate Victor. The only time you really get close is when he lets Justine die, because that was truly like an innocent person in all of this, right? She didn't deserve that. You also kind of get it, because it's like, who would believe him? No, it wasn't the girl with the necklace found on her. It was actually this weird demon creature I created. Let her go. But the point of the matter is that Victor is still wrong at the end, obviously. Then you have not his foil, but his parallel in Adam. And like I said, Adam is also pretty relatable. You're like, yeah, he's like, weird and kills people, but also it's like, yeah, dude, he should have taken care of you. He created you without thinking, and you were left defenseless, faced with the world without any love with it. Of course you're mad. And so you understand his perspective too, when he's like, even as Adam is doing all these terrible, terrible things, you get it, because the world has been extremely unfair to him. So they parallel each other. They're also both very smart. Victor and Adam think very similarly. So they approach things the same way with like the scientific method or whatever. You can really see the family resemblance, so to speak. Everything that the monster does, everything Adam does, it's like you could very easily see Victor doing that if he needed to. So it makes sense. Compare Victor and Adam to what I think are their foils, which is different from a parallel, by the way, in case you're confused on why I'm separating that. So a foil involves two characters that are different enough from each other to showcase those differences, essentially, and get a better dive into each character because of how different they are from each other. I would argue that like Henry and Elizabeth are Victor's foils, because both of them put other people first, whereas Victor tends to self-isolate and focus on his own ambition rather than like care about others. I would argue that Adam and Victor are too similar to be foils of each other, but like that's a me thing. If you can come up with a way that they're different from each other for your essay, go for it. There are a couple of things people consider to be like the main themes of Frankenstein. Ambition is one of them. You could argue that parenthood is one of them. Monsters, like what makes us monsters. That's what I did my own essay on personally when I wrote about Frankenstein. Has science gone too far? That's also like a good theme that you could do. To be completely honest, I think that the ambition theme is so stupid, because it's not that ambition is bad, it's just like Victor is Icarus, okay? Flies too close to the sun. The problem isn't that he's like, I want to create life. The problem is that he doesn't think through his actions and he just goes for it. That's where Victor fails as a character. He flies too close to the sun, which is a fun illusion that you can include in your essay starting today. There's also like general themes and symbolism in the book. Basically, anytime Victor is in nature, you can consider it symbolism. Whenever he starts to isolate himself, he's always like, and I miss the beautiful weather outside because I was too busy creating abominations against mankind. So you can argue that like straying away from what is essentially natural is a big theme in the book. He lives in like this gorgeous place. I think it's in like Germany or something. So he's always describing like how gorgeous his house is as he ignores it to work on an abomination of nature. That's kind of good. I look like I got a giant scar on my face, which is what I was going for. And then there's also the whole childhood, parental themes that are in there, because Victor is essentially the monster's Adam's father. He fails his parental duties to him. It's kind of weird. Like I said, there's a lot of, I keep calling Victor Adam's dad, But the biggest comparison is actually made between Victor and his mom and the monster and and Victor, which means that Victor is more put in the mother role, and more importantly put in a mother who abandoned her child rather than like just a father who did that. Again, there's like this weird comparison that's made, or that you could argue is made, I should say, between what happens after Victor reanimates or animates Adam and postpartum depression. He's essentially unable to function as soon as Adam is like born. You could definitely do something with that, but like it'd be a little bit difficult, I think, personally, mainly because I don't know a lot about postpartum depression. And now I'm gonna kind of go into what I did my essay on, because I do think I picked what I thought was interesting, essentially. So let's begin. I chose to do my essay when I was writing an essay about Frankenstein, about the theme that occurs in the book about what makes us monsters. Well, I worded it differently. I was like, what makes us human? Or more specifically, what makes us monsters? That's how I did it in the book. Not in the book, sorry, in my essay, because it sounds cooler. It's also weird how many allusions are made, by the way, compared to Greek gods. The book is sometimes called Frankenstein the Modern Prometheus, and if you don't know, Prometheus is the god that gave human beings fire and was like, hey, go be people now. And Zeus was mad at him because before they were like dumb and just followed all the orders, and now we had like thoughts and stuff. It was very, very difficult for us to be controlled then. So he gave us life, so to speak. And that's the biggest comparison that's made like all over the place. Obviously the book is called Frankenstein the Modern Prometheus. Except Prometheus didn't abandon us. Big difference. And so also Victor is compared to like the gods in general, because he like molds a creature out of clay, which is another Greek myth. And then I think one of the biggest illusions you can make is between him and Icarus, flying too close to the sun. And also he just has a god complex in general, because he refers to himself by these ways where he's like, I've done it, I've defeated the gods, and all this nonsense. So, and in a way, the creature also falls prey to like doing the same thing, where he's like, no, you don't understand, I'm weird and different, man. The creature tends to compare himself less to gods and more to like anti-heroes, specifically Lucifer in Paradise Lost. I also want to talk briefly about the monster being an incel. It's something I kind of skipped over, but he has that like red-pilled incel mindset where he's like, the only thing that Justine is good for is loving him. And because she won't do that, specifically because of how he looks, she won't even give him a chance. It's weird because he has all these thoughts about her, but the Justine that we learn about through Victor and specifically Elizabeth is a very sweet girl, incredibly caring, specifically towards like sick people. And there's a high likelihood that depending on how she was introduced to him, she probably wouldn't have been like mean to him. So if Victor had been like, hey, I made this guy, he's a human, he's also really tall, but I promise he won't hurt you, there's a good chance that she would have been like, oh my god, hi, it's nice to meet you. He does this all while she's like sleeping, and it's this weird, I don't know, it's very incel-y, basically, is what I'm saying. He's like, she's so vain, how dare she not even and it's like, you haven't even spoken to her, bro. She's sleeping right now. And so he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll frame her for murder. She deserves it. It's a weird, like, look into incel culture before incel culture was a thing, which is really weird. And then you have, like, the Chad, Victor Frankenstein, obviously, who's like, oh my god, just because I make a girl doesn't mean she'll like him. Oh no, she'll have her own thoughts and opinions. Oh no, everybody panic. And this is, like, a weird feminism that's present in the novel, even though, like, no female characters are like given any depth at all. Like, don't be mistaken. This book is about two men fighting it out, and it's only about men, and all of the women have very basic non-character stories. They're all about like love or whatever. So it's weird to call it a feminist novel, but like it kind of is, because it's like Victor, at the very least, is very prominent. He acknowledges the idea that women have ideas, thoughts, opinions. And so just because he makes the creature a girlfriend doesn't mean like she'll be his girlfriend. She's gonna have free will. She might not want to do that. So it's something that the monster doesn't think of that Victor does. And in that way it's kind of feminist. And then again, Victor, I kept calling him his dad. Adam's dad. But the book does this thing where they parallel Victor and his relationship with his mother, how caring she was, and she died or whatever, and that was traumatic for him. And they parallel that relationship to the relationship of Victor and Adam. So it's less like the book is trying to say he's his dad, whereas they're trying to say that he's his mother because he gave Adam life rather than just be present. He actively did some of the most important part, essentially. He's woman coded, essentially. Victor is ambitious, flies too close to the sun, and because of that, because of the fact that he never seems to care about other people while he's flying too close to the sun, he ends up becoming as monstrous as the thing he's created that isn't human, right? If you want it, because people always say that they're it's not you can't call him Frankenstein, he's Frankenstein's monster. And then somebody else would be Frankenstein was the monster. And it's he wasn't really the monster, at least not in the beginning, but towards the end he definitely gets this monstrous feel to him as he continues to put people in danger for his own gain. And instead of just saying, hey, this was all my fault, even until the very end, he's very much of the opinion that it's well, he became a murderer. It's well, he wouldn't have done that if you hadn't abandoned him. And he pretty much feels that way the entire time. So he doesn't take responsibility for his actions, and as he ignores those people closest to him and starts to isolate himself more and more, just like how Adam was isolated, he starts to feel like a very monstrous person. He loses a lot of the empathy that you have for him and a lot of the empathy that he had for others. Which means by the end, we consider him to be monstrous, not because he created life without thinking about it, because at first that's just a mistake he made, that you're okay, don't do it again, but because of the fact that he has stopped caring about others, essentially. He's dehumanized himself by the end of it. This is where the monster Adam also gets his definition of humanity and stuff. So at the very beginning, the monster Adam is obviously treated unfairly by people around him just because he looks scary. And you feel bad for him, and so you don't think he's a monster because he never had a chance. But as time progresses, and he does the same thing that Victor always does, so he begins to isolate himself, he begins to have little care for human life, begins harshly judging others, he starts to feel like a monster, not because of the way he looks, but because of how he treats others. Because of the fact that he lets his ambitions get in the way of his relationships with others. And this, to me, feels more like the theme that Mary Shelley was going for. Not ambition is bad, but rather ambition without thinking of your fellow man is bad, right? You gotta care about other people. And so this is something that both Victor and Adam fall prey to. They're both monstrous by the end of the story, right? The monster killed a 10-year-old boy. Frankenstein's monster is indeed a monster. He killed a 10-year-old boy and then blamed a random woman because she wouldn't sleep with him for it. He's a bad person, but he wasn't made a bad person. That was Victor's fault. Victor isn't a terrible person, not at first, for abandoning him because, yeah, he didn't think it through. You feel bad for him. It's only after both of them sacrifice others for their own personal gain that it starts to feel wrong. They're bad people. Never talked this long. Let me get some water. Are the two eyebrows? They're not that different, but they're different enough that I think they look cool, actually. Nice. So Frankenstein, to summarize basically my whole saying, for me at least, was a story about how our interactions with others really define us in terms of who's a monster and who isn't. It's less about your action. Well, it's not necessarily about your actions. It's less about everything else that people make it out to be, and more hey, think about others before you do something, right? The problem isn't Victor creating life, because that's not that big of a deal. The problem is that he doesn't think about the life that he created. That's the problem. He doesn't think about others. And the same can be said for Adam. So again, one of the major themes, humanity as a whole. Should I wipe off the green? That's a band, It's good enough. Anyways. Sorry, you can't talk during that part or else you will get powder everywhere. The end of Frankenstein the novel leaves you in a weird place because you're left with like science is good, but too much science is bad. You're left with like nobody's really the hero. Nobody's the good guy. Anybody who was the good guy got like murked early on in the novel. Anybody who was the good guy got like murked early in the novel. Like you could argue that like Henry, he didn't do anything wrong. He deserved better. So did Elizabeth. She was just chilling. And then her friend got accused of murder and she was like, you didn't do it, I know your heart. And she was like, yeah, she's still gonna get murdered though, so sucks to be her. And then her husband didn't like think about her, was too selfish, blinded by his own ego, and then let her get murdered too. Anyways, it's a great book. It's one of those tragedies where it's like, and people always talk about this with tragedies, where it's like, you know, it feels so unavoidable, but at the same time, it's like nothing could have changed the trajectory of the novel, right? So like the biggest thing is obviously if Victor hadn't abandoned the creature, if he hadn't ran away, that would obviously be one of the biggest saving graces of the whole novel. But also it's like, of course he ran away. He was 20 years old. There was no other option but for Victor to become overwhelmed with the realization of what he's done, what he's created, and what's gonna come from it. Of course Victor got overwhelmed. There's no other situation where Victor is suddenly like cool with it, because this is when he realizes the extent of what he's doing, right? There's no option, there's no story beat where Victor is like, oh, I just created life, normal Tuesday. Like, that's not gonna happen. So he has to run away, and the Victor and the monster Adam has to be abandoned. There's like no other option towards it. And Mary does a good job, Miss Shelley does a good job when she's writing it, because as you're reading it, you know this, right? You're not like shocked about anything Victor does. Of course Victor's not going to save Justine. He doesn't take responsibility for his actions. Why would he save her, right? We've already set up this precedent of him not taking responsibility and also, you know, ignoring the consequences to his actions. Of course, the old man starts to get startled by the monster. He hasn't been socialized properly. Of course the monster wants to take revenge. That's all he knows. He's also been trained by fiction where, you know, revenge is the only option ever instead of forgiveness. Of course he's gonna get revenge. That's all he's been taught. And it's all sad, but also like inevitable in a sense where it's like, it feels like it's not, but it is. And so Mary Shelley does an excellent job with that. But it's a good book. It's actually one of the few classics that isn't extremely boring. I mentioned like one or two boring parts. It only ends up being like a chapter or so that's like really boring, and then you eventually get into the story, and so it's not as bad, right? So even when you're reading about the family that Adam ends up living in the cellar of, right, underneath them, that's probably, I would argue, one of the most boring parts of the book. And like even still, I've read more boring things. It's only like mostly boring, you know? And then it's over in like a chapter and you're like, okay, let's get back to the real story. Like she does a good job of like not keeping you bored for long. It's one of those things where it's like, it's never really been adapted right either. Once you read it, you get kind of sad by that, where you're like, oh yeah, they never do this right. Like Victor, I think, has to be young or it's harder to forgive him for what he's doing, right? When he's like a 20-year-old in college, you're like, of course he abandoned his kid. He doesn't know any better. He's stupid. Like, even though he's smart, he's an idiot, right? But because most of the time they actually have him being a fully doctored up doctorate, like sometimes it's like, why are you creating life and then letting it escape? Like he turns into an easier person to villainize when he's older. And I think that's also the same when they turn the monster into like a stupid, I guess not stupid, but like very docile creature. Because again, in the book, he's incredibly smart. He's nearly as smart as Victor. I don't know, he's smart, obviously. He teaches himself language. And so by turning all of his acts of violence into like silly mistakes made by somebody too strong to know their full strength, right? Or in like movies, he'll like accidentally kill somebody because he doesn't realize how strong he is. In the book, it's all on purpose. It takes away from his actions, makes him more defendable. And, you know, it's kind of a shame because then none of the stories end up fully showcasing how almost gray the book actually is. It turns it into much more of a black and white situation, which is funny because the first movies were in black and white. Ooh, who would have guessed? But I can't say I hate those movies because they really did like create a genre, you know, like those were the first horror movies essentially, or like one of the first. And most of them are like still pretty entertaining in terms of like what they are. Sorry, I'm trying to create like a wing. I never do this. I'm not trying to like have either eye be a different bone structure, but like I kind of am too. And I actually do think you should read it if you get it assigned in school. or even if you don't have it for an assignment, it's just a good book. You can't go wrong with some good old Frankenstein. It's a classic for a reason. Let me add right where my pimple is, right there. I'm just gonna make that into like a mole. There, now I've got a mole instead of a pimple. I'm so creative. Like, at the end of all of it, what you really learn is that, like, it's impressive that Mary Shelley wrote a book that became so popular that she essentially created another Halloween monster. Because, like I recommended earlier, Overly Sarcastic Productions, they kind of go over this, but like, werewolves and vampires have been around for like forever, and pretty much every single culture everywhere has something about like shapeshifters and dead people, okay? Mainly because that's something that all people can get about, right? Everybody knows about shapeshifters and dead people. We all experience animals and corpses, essentially, right? Every culture has had some run-in with corpses and animals. So the idea of werewolves and vampires comes really easy from all of that. And like ghosts too, right? There's no real background for Frankenstein except for Frankenstein. So the reanimated corpse, like, that's kind of a zombie thing. You could argue that, but it's so different from zombies. It's like weird science meta, and this is what originated it, right? There's no myth basis for it. There's no background for it. She just came up with the first science fiction novel too. You have to remember, this is the first science fiction novel. A lot of people will bring up that other guy, he wrote like I, Robot or something, that guy, but his stuff actually came out after Frankenstein, mainly because it was the first time that like science as a whole was like becoming popular. There's also like this weird thing, because it's the first science fiction novel, it can feel like it's anti-science, but it's actually really pro-science in a lot of ways. Like, the teachers are all very nice. It's mainly that like the science that Victor is doing, which is this cross of like real science and alchemy, is like a little bit weird and like wrong. That's the wrong part, is that he's trying to do things without thinking fully of the consequences, and also without like peer review and stuff. I like it. The look, I mean, and the book. But the look, I'm not sure about it though. It's like a little bit weird. I'm gonna add in the stitches and see if that helps. And then some context too. As you read old classics that have been turned into like well-known media, so like The Invisible Man, Dracula, Frankenstein, also anything done by Shakespeare, they've all been like weirdly corrupted by the first movies made of them, so that the story is never exactly what it was in the book. I mentioned it at some point with The Invisible Man, how he's like completely different character-wise. Where's my fake blood? Oh, there it is. Ugh, I think I'm allergic to makeup. But it looks so fun, but it's so fun to do it. I know Universal has like the rights to Frankenstein, but like in that weird way where like nobody has the rights to Frankenstein because I think it's past copyright law. I've been thinking about it, how I would introduce the lore of Frankenstein into a movie. And as I thought of it, I came up with some ideas. Because I know Universal has like the rights to it along with like every other weird scientist guy. So like The Invisible Man and like the thing from the lake, the blob or whatever, I don't know. I think if you wanted to do like a superhero-esque monster universe, I would take Frankenstein, Victor, and not the monster. And I would do this right before Elizabeth dies. And I would have her be a more major character. That way you could have a fun girl moment. I'm trying to help capitalists out. What can I say? The rest of it could be dealing with the fact that she's like, you were gonna let me die because you're stupid and egotistical. And he would be like, okay, maybe you're right, but don't talk to me like that because I'm stupid and egotistical. It could be like a whole thing. That's my recommendation. Especially if you wanted to follow the book closely, I think it could be good. I'd also make him American, because I think it's very American to not think through your decisions and just be like, oh no, shouldn't have done that. Oh well, so this one book is responsible for like every single weird science reanimated corpse that isn't a zombie. A little niche, but it's definitely there. So like Sally, which is kind of what my look is based off of. Should I do like a line on my neck? What do we think? Not right now? Excellent choice. It's like a good book though, I'd recommend it. I also think that it's like that's, you know, like super media or superhero media when they like have a clone and it's like, do they just get a son or like a daughter or whatever? Just random. Oh, this is really hard. This one's really hard to look at because it's all the way over here. I have another mirror for just for this. Oh no, that made it worse. Okay, I'm just gonna do it with the mirror that I have right there. And they get like a surprise son and they're like, that's not my child. And somebody's like, well, I mean, it kind of is your child. Like, just because you didn't ask for it doesn't mean that you're not responsible for this being that shares your DNA that's been made into the world, right? That's just a metaphor for like, just because you didn't mean to get pregnant or get some girl pregnant doesn't mean that you aren't responsible then for the repercussions of that, which is, you know, a child in the universe who you're in charge of. But Frankenstein is interesting because it's like the first version of that, where it's like just because Victor, I mean, he meant to do it, but just because he didn't think about the repercussions of that doesn't mean he's not at fault for not being ready to be a father or a mother figure, almost, as presented in the book, like I said earlier. And then I think I want to add just a little bit of bleed to the end of these little holes. And like I said, it is pretty impressive that she managed to like create a genre that had like never been a thing before. Again, you have to think about that when you're reading it. This is the problem I'm having currently with Dracula, is that Dracula didn't exist before Dracula. Frankenstein did not exist before Frankenstein. So while you're reading Frankenstein, or while I'm telling the story, and you see it all slowly come together, you know, and you already know that's going to happen. The people who were reading it at the time did not. And this is the problem I'm having with Dracula right now, where it's like he's walking up to Dracula's, he's like going to meet Dracula. And he's like, I'm going to go meet Dracula. So weird that all these guys keep shoving crucifixes in my hands. Better continue my business deal with Count Dracula. I'm sure everything will go fine. Where did my thing go? I need a metal tool. Where's the metal tool I was going to use? This is sad. Okay. Because it's right in front of my face. Stupid. I need a different kind of fake blood because this is just not sticking to my skin. This is just going to be like me fast forward as I go through this. Maybe I need a different metal tool because like this doesn't, it's not like dripping off the way I want it to, so I can have like just little dots. Yeah, nice. I look a little bit like Shrek in the mouth area. Let me go ahead and grab some contacts so we can finish up this look, and then I can do like some final thoughts on Frankenstein. Even though I've been doing that for like the past hour, and I don't know, I repeat myself a lot. I don't believe in scripts. Bye. How do I stop recording? Stop. The button went away. It came back. Bye. I am now blind out of my right eye. So this is the look. It's fun. It's fresh. I think I'm going to add a little bit of eyeliner to the center of my face a little bit. I like the gore aspect. Oh, William's calling me.
What the fuck?
Cool, huh?
Yeah, it's very creepy. I like it.
Thank you.
It's tripping me the fuck out. It's making me...
Some quick accessories, and I put my hair down so you couldn't see my ears and how they don't match my skin. If you ignore this down, I think if I was actually gonna like go for it, I'd probably wear like a turtleneck or something, or paint my neck and my chin or and my chest, but I didn't feel like doing that, and it's too hot right now to wear a turtleneck. Shout out that California weather. It's like October 29th, it's like 80 degrees outside. So this is the finished look. Let me finish up my thoughts about Frankenstein as a whole. Fun fact, the light is right here. This is where my mirror was. And you might be like, what kind of mirror? It was this big. This was my mirror. So kind of impressive, actually, when you think about it like that. Okay, so my finishing thoughts on like Frankenstein as a whole. Let me grab the book, actually, see if there's anything else that I find interesting about it that I should mention. Wait, where did I put it? Was it behind me and it was just hiding? Oh my god, it was. It was behind me the whole time. As you can see, I had to write a paper on it, so I bookmarked it all the way through. Yeah, so basically, I wrote mine about how, like, when you isolate yourself and put your own needs above others, that's truly what makes you the monster rather than the way you look. But again, even so, the monster wasn't even hideous. He was just, like, tall and had weird eyes. I think it's impressive what Mary Shelley did, and I actually do recommend reading the book. I give it, like, for classic literature, 5 out of 5. For, like, regular books that I've read, it's like a 3.5 to a 4. Like, it does its job. It knows what it's doing, and I feel like a lot of books nowadays, like, meander about or, like, maybe do too much. But, like, Frankenstein knows what it's about. It's about Frankenstein. It's about both the creature and Victor. And so it tells that story. It's nothing crazy happens besides, like, you know, reanimating the corpse. Despite that, you know, the characters change, but in very realistic ways. Despite the way that a lot of movies present the book, like in this very black and white cartoony fashion, there's nothing cartoony about this. Victor feels like a real guy, and so does Adam, so does the monster. He feels like a person who just had a bad situation happen to him, and you're like, you still shouldn't murder people. It feels very human, so that's why I chose that as the theme for mine, because to me it seems so silly to choose something like ambition, because it's like, Mary Shelley was a writer who wrote a whole book in one night. Like, she wrote this during a thunderstorm in one night, and was friends with a bunch of other writers who she spent most of her time with. Obviously, she's not saying don't be ambitious. She's advocating instead for just caution with that ambition. Stay human with this ambition. And it's the same if you pick like a parental theme instead. She's not like, don't have kids. She's like, hey, you're responsible for this life. Act like it. I don't know. Basically the book is like, moderation is key to everything. Maybe I should change the way this is set up. Hold on. This was a terrible idea. Does this work? Yeah, that works really well. Brighten up the frame a little bit so you can't see all my mistakes. Now I get to sit back a little bit, enjoy life, and zoom out so you can see more of the nothing. There's nothing to see. Why did I spend so long doing that? It was worthless. Anyways, now I can turn this back and I don't have to worry about it so much. Anyways, I think the biggest thing that you can get from Frankenstein is just like, moderation is key to life, you know? Like, as soon as any of these guys start to do anything in excess, that's when problems start, right? That's interesting because the downfall for each character is like, essentially it's hubris, right? For both of them, pride. So for Victor, it's the fact that he won't admit that he's done wrong by Adam. He never is like, I'm sorry I abandoned you, I shouldn't have done that. So that's all pride, right? And for Adam, it's this, he's too prideful to like, and he has to get revenge. He can't let that go. The damage that's been done to him, he can't let it go and just try to figure out a way to live with other people. He needs to harm people who don't deserve it. Like a 10-year-old boy who, after talking to the 10-year-old boy for like 5 seconds, he's like used to him. Like, he's like, yeah, you're weird, and I'm like, I'm from the Frankenstein family, and like, we're gonna throw you in jail, but like, that's a 10-year-old boy. So like, it's very clear that if somebody gave the monster Adam an opportunity, he could have a very sustainable life. But because nobody does that, and because he starts to focus on revenge instead of finding somebody who would do that for him, that's when problems start. Plagiarize the video. This wasn't even like a great video to plagiarize. You could probably get like a C though, if you did it right. Added some academic language, you know? Oh, the copy I had, by the way, had like all of the fun quotes at the back. I lied. It had all of the fun quotes at like the beginning from the pages of Frankenstein. So yeah, Frankenstein's a classic novel that you've heard about, and I just summarized and gave you some themes and real basic stuff about it. Let's hope I didn't lose too much footage for when my camera battery died, and let's hope I film another YouTube video a little bit sooner than I filmed this one. Give me some ideas. What do you want to hear about? Another classic novel? I've read a lot of them. Another novel in general? I've read a lot of them. A TV show I've watched a lot of them. I'm a consumer of media. So like, maybe I'll do The Invisible Man next, because like, that one's kind of fun, but also Why Teen Wolf is good, Why Gilmore Girls sucks, or just an entire explanation of Pretty Little Liars. I don't know who would watch that in 2021 or 2022, depending on if I ever film that video, but I would do it. Alright, bye.